Hey folks, all right. So I want to show you all how to build a complex constraint relationship with objects. I'll show you an easy technique, and then I'm going to show you a really complex technique. Feel free to use whichever technique fits your needs. First, the easy technique. So currently, I have a character holding a ball. Both hands are in IK. So if I select both of those, you can see, hey, all right, there we go. The hand's floating through space. Hands floating through space. It's going to stay wherever it goes, right? And if I move the torso, those are going to, well, on this rig, let me change those to stop following the chest. Those are going to stay. That's like how our rigs are built, right? There we go. Those IK handles are now going to stay in place wherever we place them, right? But I want them to follow this ball that I have, and I have an control for this ball, right? Currently, they're not. So you maybe think, all right, cool. Well, I just need to select the control for the ball and the control for the hand and say constrain parent. Well, mine kind of flipped. I need to make sure constrain parent maintain offset is turned on. There we go. So now that hand is going to follow wherever that ball goes, which you may think is great. But what if you needed to pull the hand off and animate it repositioning on the ball? The problem is this hand is now constrained by that constraint that we built. You can see translates XYZ, rotates XYZ are now blue, and we can no longer animate those. So the easy method to build this connection, instead of building it directly to the control, is to build it to the control's offset group. So if I select that wrist control and hit F in my outliner, there's the wrist control, and then there's the offset group for that wrist control. So I can select the control for the ball, then the offset group, apply, and now whenever I move this hand, or the ball rather, the hand follows, and I can still animate it repositioning however I want, right? The problem with that is, and I'll show you here, I'll put some animation on it, right? So he brings it up to his face, and then, we'll have him kind of like push it away from his face. We'll just do, throw some animation on it. So let's say like as he's pushing it away, I want that hand to come off of it. It's like he's pushing it like he's throwing it to somebody or something, right? So like, or he's dropping it, I guess I should say. Whatever, it doesn't really matter, but I want to have that hand pull away. The problem with this is this hand isn't just going off of the animation that I'm setting for it, right? It's going off of the animation that I'm setting for it and its offset group, which is parented. So it's always going to be a little off from what we animate because it's being always driven by this constraint. This connection, I'm going to hit undo until I get rid of all this animation that I've done. This connection will work for the most part, especially if you're just ever so slightly repositioning the hand. Like it's coming up and then it's going down, it's coming underneath or something like that, right? That will work. But if we have a complex connection, and let me put this other hand on top of the ball, where we want the hand to come off it, do something out here, and then come back on later onto the ball, maybe even at a different angle, that's where things get really complex. Because like I said, even when we're off via this technique, it's always going to be driven by that constraint. And that can make things look a little odd, and essentially we end up with not super good arcs. So that's the easy constraint technique and will work for a lot of circumstances, but for a more complex circumstance, it will not. Let me show you how to make a more complex setup, okay? And this is going to definitely take a lot of time and effort to put into it. But essentially, we need to make a new mini rig within our animation file, okay? So what I want to do is really rely on not only parent constraints and offset groups, but also locators. These are really great for this. I'm going to create a locator. And I can do that under my rigging toolkit. It's the first button under the shelf. Or I can go to create locator. There we go. I'm going to group this to itself. Locator is now grouped to itself. And I want to call this very specifically on ball. And then I'll name the group on ball GRP. That way I know this locator is meant for the location of the hand whenever it is constrained to the ball, on ball. That way I know it is. Maybe yours is a book, maybe yours is a wall, whatever you want to call it. This is on ball. Now I'm going to duplicate that same system, and I could have just created another locator. And actually, before duplicating it now, I will move it into position. I could eyeball this, right? And we would be hunky-dory. But since I've already posed my hand, my wrist constraint here, on top of the ball, I can match that transformation. So I'm going to select the group and then the wrist control and go to modify, match all transformations. So now, hey, there we go. My locator is on, quote unquote, on the ball, and we're good to go. Now, the complexities of this really require me to start building this on one frame. So if you've already built some animation at this point during this process, make sure you're staying on one frame. And then after we get some of this stuff built, we can get off of this frame, we can scrub through and start building this hand coming off of it. I'm going to duplicate this group now that I have it matched in that position. So Control D. I now have another on-ball group and on-ball, but this one I want to rename to free hand, or whatever you want to call it, right? Free hand. And I'll leave it where it's at for now, but we can come back and animate this later. Essentially, what we're going to select to animate now instead of the wrist control are these two locators inside of their offset groups. But we need some complex setups with constraints to determine where those locators are, because currently if I move my ball, no locator follows them, and if I remove the locator, the hand doesn't follow the locators. So we're going to change these up. So very first off, I want to make sure that both of these offset groups are following my, or one of them rather, the one on ball is following the ball. So we'll select the ball constraint or the ball control here, right? And I will select the on ball group and build this parent constraint, maintain offset. There we go. And I want to make sure that this constrainer, both of these locators, are controlling the IK handle. So I'm going to select, we'll do these one at a time. I'm going to select on ball, then the locator. And remember, I've not scrubbed, don't scrub through your animation. Make sure we're all in the same frame. That way the pivots are all in the same location as we build these connections, okay? So I'm going to make sure to select the on ball locator, then the control or the controls offset group, and build a parent constraint. And then I'm going to say the free hand, and then the control, and do the exact same thing. We've done this before in the FK-IK switch, where we have one object being driven by two constraints. If you take a look here, under the shapes, we have a parent constraint, we have on ball and free hand. Notice that they're both set to 1. As we build this complex animation, I'm going to toggle between these two. Remember, 0 means off, 1 means on. If you can't find this in your channel box for whatever reason, if it doesn't show up as a parent constraint under your shapes with the selected wrist control, make sure to select your wrist control, hit F, find it up here, open it up, and there we go. IK arm parent constraint. We can go ahead and rename this to ball track constraints. Because this is going to have this, and you can see over here in my channel box with that selected, this has on ball or free hand all ready to go. Cool. So starting off with my animation, and before we do much of anything, I want to move this and show you. You don't have to do this. Remember, don't scrub, don't move things, but just to demonstrate. Currently, as I move this, those two constraints are fighting for power. You can see the locator that I constrained to make sure to move with the ball, which I called on ball, is pulling the hand away from the free hand. And the reason this is they are both in control. So I'm going to undo all those movements and get back here. I'm going to go to that parent constraint and make sure, ball track constraints, and make sure that at the beginning of my animation, and I'll go to frame 6, because up till frame 6, I want to make sure that the hand is on the ball. I want to make sure on ball is keyed on, and you can right click and say key selected. And then I'm going to make sure free hand is keyed off. And I can right click and say key selected. So now whenever I select this, it's moving perfectly with my ball, and the other locator is chilling, vibing back at the wherever we place it, right? So I can set this animation now. I'm going to go to frame 0, set it down here, and let's say that he's lifting it up. He comes up to frame 6, he pulls it up, and this is where, on frame 6, is where we're going to start this transition of the hand coming off of the ball and going to the underside of it. Sweet. So what I want to start now is, and in fact, I can start that transition sooner. We'll start it at frame 3. Well, no, we'll start. I'm sorry. We'll start it at 6, like I said previously. So I'm gonna go back to my ball constraints. I'll go out to frame 2 or 3 frames later. So let's do 3, and I'll go to frame 9, and I'll turn on ball off. Right click, say key selected, and I'll turn freehand on. Turn that to 1, and key selected. So now during frame 6 and 9, that IK control is blending between the on-ball constraint and the freehand constraint. And instead of animating the actual control now, I want to animate these locators. So this is the freehand, and I want to make sure that it's not necessarily going down, but maybe going out. And maybe it does something out here, right? So it comes out, and I can animate it kind of like doing a nice little arc down. And keep in mind, I have that freehand locator selected, not the on-ball locator or the IK hand control. So we're coming out. Maybe I want to position it here, and you know it's coming down, and maybe underneath here. Cool. And then I want to have this come back up and go back to the on-ball. So let's go back to the other constraint, the ball track constraints. There it is. There's the on-ball and the freehand. So now on frame 14, I want to make sure to maintain that freehand, make sure it stays at 1, and make sure the 0 stays at 0. And notice here, after I've done that, the in-betweens, my keys are kind of like going to negative 0.09 and 1.09. Well, that's because in my graph editor, my default keys are set to kind of like overlap. So I just want to change all these to linear. There we go. So now it's just going to stay at a linear rate. Fantastic. And I might need to go back and keep redoing that, but that's okay. So I'm repositioning this hand, but I'll take from frame 14 to frame, we'll say 16 or 17, and I'm going to invert those ball track constraints one more time. So it's going to go back to the on ball and get away from the on hand. I want to make sure to key those. So it'll go back to on ball and freehand. The problem is I wanted to reposition this on the underside and not the upper side. Well, the cool thing is that locator, the on-ball locator that I built, I can now reposition and animate. I do want to make sure I set a keyframe at the beginning where it is on the ball, and then it'll come off and then come back under, and then make sure that when it comes back to contact and goes back to this constraint, that it's actually going to go underneath and contact the ball. Looks a little odd right now, but I think I have just a couple of hiccups in the animation. Nothing too crazy. And I just want to make sure to go through and make sure all of this stuff is nice and neat. So I do have the freehand animation stopping. Let's go bring those keys back. I do have it stopping at frame 13 and then not transitioning until 16. So I'll take that second keyframe and push it to frame 16. So it kind of goes out and then comes back in. All in one fell swoop. And then I can go back to my ball, key it, and now I can move this around again. So he's even bringing it up even closer to his face. He's just going to give it a little nibble. He's going to chew on it a little bit. There we go. So now I can animate. If I didn't like that arc, I can be like, okay, cool. Like I didn't like how it's coming down. It's a little too low right in here in this area. Maybe I'll bring it up a little bit, and then maybe down just a bit more. Just remember, this is a pretty complex thing. And if I wanted to give myself more time for this, not only would I have to adjust the animation for these keys, so now at frame 22, this is going there, but I'd have to adjust the animation for the constraints as well. So I just want to make sure that that also happens on frame 22. So I've given myself more time, and now we have like a much more complex and robust connection between all of this stuff. So I can keep doing this all day. So if I wanted to reconnect it so that he is pushing in from the left side, I could go back to the constraints and toggle them off and then toggle them back on. And this is, we notice like this is a pretty quick pop right here, and that's just due to the location of this and how quick that constraint is. So I'm going to make sure that this happens over a lot longer of a time period. 6 to 12 rather than 6 to 9. So 6 frames instead of, there we go. And we can always animate some overlapping action, right? So we can rotate the wrist in. It comes out. Maybe not that much. Maybe it's still rotated in here. Now it's starting to come down. There we go. So you can see, like this, we can get like, his hand is doing some odd things here for sure. And I just want to make sure to really clean these animations up, right? But there we go. That's starting to look better. Maybe I can get rid of that frame. There we go. Maybe that's just a bit too far down for this repositioning. And I can be very pedantic, just go through and update the angles of all of this stuff. And maybe if that's way too far. So anyway, you get the idea, hopefully, that you can build a really complex system here, and we can be very manipulative with how we blend between those two different locators and animate them. Now, if we retime this stuff, we don't just retime the locator's animation, but also the constraints when we're toggling off and on. I often like to keep a little notepad next to my desk and be like, okay, cool, frames 6 to 12, I'm toggling between, I'm blending between those two different locators. I hope that helps, and if you have any issues, please reach out.